Please welcome the Commissioner of the NBA, Adam Silver, and the co-host of ABC's Good Morning America, Robin Roberts.
Thank you. I was just telling Adam, I don't think they know that we're kind of tall. These chairs, oh, the older I get, the better I was. Oh, my goodness. Good afternoon. Is it still able to say good morning? Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Adam.
Good morning, Robin.
Always appreciate being in your presence and really want to spend the majority of the time talking about the new initiatives when it comes to mental health support for athletes. That's what we're primarily here to discuss. But of course, you know what's in the headlines, the controversy with China and Daryl, what he said, Morey, what he said, and the comments that he made, the tweet that he made about Hong Kong. And the NBA's response in the beginning used the word regrettable when talking about the outcome of that tweet, of his comments. And you received some criticism initially for the first response. Since that time, you've gone on the offensive and you have said that you support free speech. So can you clarify your position?
Absolutely. And just to be clear, we did use the word regrettable initially, but the regrettable was modifying the fact that we had upset our Chinese fans. And maybe a mistake or not, but I think, it's too long an answer, but basketball has a very long history in China. After James Naismith invented it as a Christian missionary in Massachusetts in the late 1890s, one of the first things those missionaries did was to bring basketball to China. China participated in the Olympics in the 1930s in basketball. First NBA team played in China in 1979. We've been on air with CCTV in China for over 30 years. And last season, over 600 million people in China watched a portion of an NBA game. So the regrettable notion was that we had upset our fans. I didn't think at that time, while we were saying we regretted upsetting our fans, that also at the same time supporting Daryl Morey's right to express himself, right to tweet. Obviously, we made clear that we were being asked to fire him by the Chinese government, by the parties we dealt with, government and business. We said there's no chance that's happening. There's no chance we'll even discipline him. So in that context, I was saying on one hand we were supporting free expression, but again, maybe I was trying too hard to be a diplomat in saying that we understand, though, that the reaction, by the way, not by the government, there was no regret that directed to the government, to our fans. As I said, hundreds of millions of them in China. Subsequently, because I saw that, in my mind, that was being misinterpreted, we wanted to make an absolute clear statement that the values of the NBA, these American values, we are an American business, travel with us wherever we go. And one of those values is free expression. And we wanted to make sure that everyone understood we were supporting free expression and also making clear that the Chinese people, again, less about the government, but our Chinese fans understood that providing a platform for freedom of expression is different than adjudicating a particular point of view. And so I didn't see it as my role as commissioner of the NBA to weigh in on the substance of the protest, but to say, here's this platform. And in fact, Joe Tsai, the new owner of the Brooklyn Nets here in New York, also wrote a piece in which he wanted to give a Chinese perspective on how they saw the activities in Hong Kong, and I thought that's perfectly appropriate too.
In taking your stance and being supportive of you and the league, are you willing to absorb the possible loss that may come, financial loss that may come from this support?
Not only willing, but we are. The losses have already been substantial. Our games are not back on the air in China as we speak, and we'll see what happens next. Again, the coverage, frankly, was confusing to me when I got home. Because I was over in China at the time, only because I had thought we'd taken a principled position. I thought we hadn't so-called acquiesced to the Chinese. I understand there is a point of view from some that we shouldn't be in business at all in China. And I'd say from an intellectual standpoint, if that's fair, not getting into whether the tweet or the response to it, but if people believe that we shouldn't be engaged in commerce in China, or frankly in other places in the world where they don't approve of their practices or government, okay, but then we're in the middle, again, I sort of at some point look to the American government. We're in the middle of negotiating a trade agreement. Many multinational corporations obviously trade extensively with China, and if that's ultimately how our government feels we should be dealing with China, again, we are a U.S. company. But just to finish off the answer, the reason I gave a little bit of the history on the NBA in China is we've always felt that constructive engagement, especially in sports, is very positive. And in a way, it relates to what we're about to talk about in terms of mental health. Even that earlier production of Dear Evan Hansen, I mean, whether it's through the arts, talking about mental health, whether it's talking about building relationship through sports. Your background is in sports. You've been all over the world in sports, and it brings people together often in a way that governments don't. Our own State Department calls it people-to-people exchanges. And I think when you build that commonality, over time, it potentially leads to shared understandings, empathy, begins dialogues, often things that aren't happening at high levels among official government operatives or diplomats, that it is a sense. So for me, in terms of my disappointment while I was over there, I've been going to China for, plus more than 15 years where we've been playing where the NBA, modern NBA has been playing games there and going multiple times a year. And again, I felt we had made enormous progress in terms of building cultural exchanges with the Chinese people. And I have regret that much of that was lost. And I'm not even sure where we'll go from here, but the direct answer to your question is that the financial consequences have been and may continue to be fairly dramatic.
Well, we could go on and talk about this, but we do want to talk about the mental health aspect and the new initiatives that the league has undertaken in supporting the athletes. How is it different from programs you've had before? And just give us a broad overview of what it is, this new initiative.
Sure. I mean, essentially the new initiative is to now require a certain complement of mental health professionals at every NBA team. I think a lot of our teams have been doing a great job with mental health historically, but it wasn't done in a league-wide organized fashion. And so if a player played for one team, they might have a strong mental health program, but then if that player were traded or signed with another team, there might be no program in place. So I think I should say also, the initiative was a joint program with Michelle Roberts and our Players Association. I think we both came to the conclusion at the same time that we needed to do more to support the mental health of our players. So the union developed an independent program from ours. I mean, we coordinate with them, but they have their own independent program. The league has a program, and now what's really new this year is team by team, every team has in place a mental health complement, a psychiatrist, mental health workers assigned to the teams. And most importantly, I mean, this does go a little bit to Dear Evan Hansen, this notion of, and I know some mental health professionals hate when I use the word stigma, but I see it in sports. You played sports, You've been around it. At least historically, there was a stigma around getting help for mental health issues.
Why do you think that is? Because people have talked about that, whether I've gone through cancer. People support it, they understand it. The players going through physical injuries and go through rehab and treatment, people understand it. But when it comes to mental health issues, it stays in the shadows. Why do you think that is, and how do we move it out of the shadow?
I can, even from my short-lived athletic career in high school, that there was a sense that it was a weakness. If you raised your hand and said to the coach that I'm really stressed, or I'm having trouble, sleeping, or boy, I'm really shaky when you put me on the floor and there's people screaming at me. It just seems something that I certainly in men's sports seem to go against the sort of, at least the perceived need to have a machoism around the culture of sports. And what's been so incredible over the last few years is, and again, to destigmatize it, we've had two very prominent players, DeMar DeRozan and Kevin Love, came forward. And they came to the league office and they said, we want to speak out about this just because we've experienced it. And while we are getting treated for anxiety issues, depression issues, but we think it's important that we share with the world the fact that, look, that we, as sort of big-time NBA athletes, frankly, are dealing with some of the same issues that everybody else in the world is dealing with. And it was their idea. They came to us and said, let's do a public service campaign, and let's run commercials and just show people that you can get help. And back to the programs in the league, and it gets confused sometime with our players. What I've said, their decision to speak out is unique to them. And certainly the message to our players who want to get help isn't that you not only need to get help, but you need to be public about it. Really the message is combination of the Players Association, team, and league, or obviously anybody could just go on their own and get help, is that get help. You know, if you are dealing with these kinds of issues, which I think for a lot of our players didn't even understand were things that other people dealt with. Because they were sort of conditioned to keep it all inside, they didn't even realize that when they could talk to people, it's like, oh, you mean lots of other people have similar, can't sleep and get really frustrated or feel really dark, or all the things that go along with mental health issues.
You said in March that we're living in a time of anxiety. You said this in March, and you cited social media as part of it.
I was speaking for myself. Yeah.
Were you? Yeah, okay. But what have you learned in the interim since that time in March? And have more players reached out to you about it?
What I've learned since then, I was being interviewed, and I said that something along the lines that a lot of players who come and talk to me one-on-one, because there's been more talk around mental health in the league, will say, just in a one-on-one setting, that, yeah, I have issues that I feel very isolated. I mean, I just, by one way of example, you know, when you used to cover teams, that players didn't have screens and headphones for the most part. You went in the locker room, there was music that was shared by everyone. You got on the plane, largely they played card games or other things together. Maybe there was some movie on a screen on the plane, but certainly no one was having an individual experience. You go in a lot of our locker rooms now, it's actually quiet because everybody's living in their own isolated world. They have their headset on, and when they get, same thing if you get on team planes and buses, it's a personalized experience. And I think it's led to a lot of isolation for these guys, because also a lot of them, because, I mean, they're not complaining, but they're famous as NBA players. So they travel, and again, they're not complaining about the charters they travel on, but they get to a city and they largely don't leave their rooms, because it's not so easy to go walk in the mall if they're not sort of in the mood to attract that much attention. And I mean, again, just so it's clear, I mean, they understand all the benefits that come with being famous, but they end up being very isolated, and I believe that causes some of the problem. And then I'll just add, and I think this for this young generation of players, and I'm on the board of my college, so I'm hearing a lot of these same things are going on in college campuses, that social media, it seems pretty clear, is raising the anxiety level and stress level among our young people. There's a lot of hate speech out there. There's stress to be included. There's emotional issues about being left out of groups. And then compound that with NBA players when there's, in some cases, millions and millions of seemingly anonymous people taking shots at them. And while the advice often is just don't read it, it's awfully hard. And I think that to withstand that as a young person, even if you're otherwise at the top of your game, you know, especially in a team sport where you have fans and therefore you have lots of people, you know, who aren't your fans who are rooting against your team. And it's a very difficult environment for them to be in, I think, for anyone. And which is why for us, we're increasingly trying to train people. It's more a notion of mental health in that we even in our junior programs, I mean, we've always trained people in our junior NBA programs to learn to shoot or play defense. And then we added some physical fitness components. But now we've added a mental health component to those junior programs. So we can talk about breathing exercises and how to de-stress and how to deal with difficulties in life.
Another thing that you've done in recent years is about rest, that you have cut down the number of back-to-back games and knowing the importance of recovery. What is a message here that all of us can learn about the need for that?
Get more sleep. Well, I mean, all of us who are so many business travelers in this room, and I'm guilty of it too. I think it's different though when, you know, you're jet lagged and you have to get on a court and run up and down at full speed and be expected to perform at a high level. What we've seen in the data is pretty clear on this too, that there's been a lot of sleep studies, individual team studies, and league studies around the travel of our players. And the fact is, it's not just the length of the plane ride. crossing time zones makes a big difference. The time changes make a big difference. It makes a big difference on their performance, and the fatigue correlates to injuries. So what we've done is we're now at an all-time low in terms of cutting down the number of back-to-back games, as you've said, the number of 4 games out of 5 nights. We've added a week to our schedule just to create some more space in how we schedule our games. But again, it's really, and our teams are much more focused on it in terms of, you know, when they're talking to their guys, it's not just the conventional conditioning. It's very focused on diet. You know, hearing certainly Vice President Gore on that, you know, and very focused on sleep hygiene. And, you know, and part of it also is, I mean, these are young people who might not otherwise know better that the effect a bright screen can have on you if you're trying to fall asleep and you're staring at a screen, and turning off that screen and finding times to disengage from social media. I mean, of course, we use it as a league, so I don't want to be too critical. I mean, the fact it exists, and it's how a lot of our fans and fans in China connect with the NBA, but we have to recognize the downside of it as well.
A final question to kind of put this a little bow on it, and it's kind of something what you alluded to earlier. You know, sport is a microcosm of society. It really is. And do you think that, you know, sports in general, the landscape is changing when we're talking about these issues, that you've had these players that have come forward, and can it be a model for elsewhere?
Absolutely. I mean, my information is a little bit anecdotal, but I would say prior to 2 years ago, and I've been with the league now for 28 years, I've never had a conversation with a player about his mental health issues. And by the way, WNBA is doing all these things as well. But and since Kevin Love and DeMar DeRozan came out, I mean, since the Players Association put in place their programs and we've started to talk about it very publicly and run public service announcements, I've seen a complete sea change. And what's even better is where we can really scale in our youth programs that reach millions of kids. We've added a component of mental health to those components as well. So it's not just about these elite wealthy players. It's really we can reach millions and millions of kids globally, and also through our public service announcements, hundreds of millions of people. Well,
and hopefully it will be a model for others to be able to use. Adam Silver, thank you as always for your willingness to discuss this as well as the other situations. Thank you very much. Thank you.